almost everyone here now. Well, it's good to see everyone here. I don't think anyone's heard my talk last time about anxiety anyway, when we were doing it with during COVID. And the focus of this is not going to be to talk about anxiety. Anxiety is a topic we probably could have a dozen lectures on and not to really scratch the surface. But I want to look at particularly tonight about the natural management of anxiety. A lot of this is to do with the roles of food and other natural things in the management of anxiety. I'll get this all working and my finger in the right spot. So what are we talking about? Anxiety is said to be the unpleasant state of inner turmoil with feelings of dread. For those of you who've had anxiety, you don't need anyone to explain it to you. The physical symptoms often associated with this feeling of dread come from a release of adrenaline. Your pulse goes fast, you feel tight in the chest, you develop butterflies in the tummy, you feel a little bit breathless and short of breath, you get sweaty, dizzy, trembling, and you can't sleep properly. Now, the threat may be real or it may be just merely perceived, which means that if it's not real, it may just be something that you're thinking about. Fear itself is described as the unpleasant emotion caused by being aware of danger. But we can be fear when we think it's danger as well, so it's not a case of whether it's danger or not. But it seems to be something that sort of comes and goes a little bit. And being afraid is a similar idea, and panic attacks are things that many people experience. And worry is said to be the uneasiness about something, feeling cornered or feeling troubled. Now, this can often be associated. Depression and anxiety often go together. So people who feel cornered and get anxious often end up feeling depressed. And we can talk about depression separately as well in its own right. But we're going to bit of crossover tonight. Now the incidence, they say 1 in 4 people in their lifetime, more females than males admit to it. Because I think it is a case of what you admit to. 2 million per year in Australia, so that's a lot of people that are having issues, and I'm quite sure a lot of the issues are self-medicated as well. So people with anxiety are often self-medicating with things such as alcohol, and taking a number of other illicit drugs. Cannabis is a very good drug for relaxation. Now, anxiety is often associated with avoiding any behaviours that cause you stress. People often develop preoccupations, memory problems thinking, poor concentration and feeling out of control. We're just going to flick through most of this stuff, and we can talk about it later if we want to come back to it. So treatment is all about taking control back. Rather than having anxiety control you controlling anxiety. We want to do sometimes things to switch the anxiety off. Psychological treatment can be just a lot of talking therapies, cognitive behavioural therapies, and there are a number of things called e-therapies that are used as well. And medical treatment, we had a whole generation that took Valium and various benzos to help try to control it. The antidepressants that we use these days are very, very good at controlling anxiety. So things that block serotonin, noradrenaline, dopamine. Serotonin antagonists are really good. So the SSRIs really stop people feeling depressed, but they also stop them feeling anxious. And there's a number of self-help strategies that are available, and those self-help strategies can be involved doing breathing. And I think if be ashamed to pass up without talking about breathing, deep diaphragmatic breathing, and as what I like to call a sigh breath. You can train your system to learn to relax quite dramatically with deep diaphragmatic breathing. Colour breathing. Colour breathing is an interesting thing of actually visualising, sucking in the blues and the greens of the ocean and the land, and blowing out the oranges and the reds of the of stress and anxiety. And if you just close your eyes into a deep diaphragmatic breath and think about blue and green coming in, and oranges and reds going out, then you get the psychological feeling of calm. Now, another technique that's very interesting is splashing your face with cold water. If you're feeling really, really stressed at any particular stage, just go and get water and splash it up in your face. We get what calls the diving reflex. The diving reflex slows your pulse down. It makes you feel calm, and your whole system changes in anticipation of going underwater, and it works wonderfully. Muscle relaxation techniques are certainly very beneficial. The technique of staying now is all about trying to live in the moment. Too much of our time is spent worrying about the past or thinking about the past and mulling over that, or thinking about the future, whereas thinking about staying in the now is a really important part of dealing with and relaxing. Some of the techniques involve bravery, desensitizing people. Feel the feel, but do it anyway. There's mental imagery of trying to imagine yourself in the situation, of helping to help you cope with it and gradually unfold situations that cause your anxiety. We learn to challenge our self-talk. And I encourage people who get a lot of worry with their anxiety to actually write them all down and have a worry session. Seems counterproductive that we have people too much worried, but if by writing it all down, we try and download it from there to the paper. And some people find just diarying their lives to sort of say, well, this is the things that have been causing my worries. This is what it's all about. Online forums are very useful these days, and Beyond Blue is one place that helps people deal with anxiety. Talking to anybody is useful, but sometimes you wear your friends out a little bit if you're always anxious and always talking to them about your problems with your anxiety. So sometimes it's worthwhile getting a professional to talk to, that you pay to listen to your worries. Be kind to yourself. I mean, a lot of people beat themselves up all the time, and their self-talk is one of the things that is really, really something that destroys your life. And I was talking to someone once who employed a plumber who was sorting something out for him, and he caught him talking to himself saying, "That's a really good idea. Very smart thinking, Jim. Yes, that's very great." And he said he would, on the alternative, would sort of every time something would go wrong, he'd be beating himself and sort of saying, "Oh, you stupid thing, you stupid thing, you stupid thing." Exercise is an important natural thing as well. Exercise burns adrenaline and makes us feel calm, and so people who are feeling really anxious are best to go for a walk, do something, just do something physically is what's important. Being out and about is so terribly important. The blues and greens of nature are by their own very nature psychologically very relaxing. Making sure we get plenty of rest, daily rest, good sleep, a weekly day off. Sabbath of rest is an important thing for many people, and they find it helps them deal with their anxiety. Having family and friends with that rest is often a very good time to be able to socialise and to lose the focus so much on what's going on inside. Practicing relaxation, doing what you love. Once you start to get into what we call to be almost into that space where we forget ourselves. Getting into the zone, I think, is what they call it, where we just forget about ourselves and move on. Caffeine is something that stimulates and causes problems with anxiety directly, and withdrawal from alcohol normally makes us feel anxious as well. So this is just a little thumbnail sketch, perhaps. It's we've done in a few minutes, and we can come back and talk about all of those things if we want to. One of the things I wanted to do as part of the chip is to sort of say, does diet make any difference? And what is the role of what we eat as well important in this? So this is one of the number of studies that have been done now looking at fruit and vegetables in their role in terms of our well-being, and it's been shown quite clearly now that fruit and vegetables decrease our anxiety, increase our happiness, increase our life satisfaction, and improve our social, emotional well-being feelings. And it doesn't take much. You notice on the bottom there, it's not just specifically about anxiety, but it's about depression. For every half an apple you eat, you get a 3% reduction risk of depression. So that tells me that 5 apples will reduce you by about 30%. Sorry, I'll do that again. Yeah, 30%. 5 apples will reduce your risk of depression by about 30%. It doesn't have to be apples, but that's just giving you an idea that an apple's around about 200 grams. And this is represented pictorially in this picture here, where it says they measured the change in fruit and vegetable portions. So we just got 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 across the bottom. And then we've got a scale of changes in life satisfaction on the vertical axis there. I don't know exactly what those numbers mean, but when I read the literature, that is a very significant change, and it's still going up at 8, and most people are suggesting we should be having around about 10 serves of fruit and vegetables a day, which makes a dramatic difference to our change in life satisfaction. Now, in the Californian Adventist study, California Adventists are very interesting. There's some of them who eat whatever they feel like, and they're listed as the omnivores. OMN is omnivores, and VEG is the vegans. And they broke them up into males and females, and we found there that you see the score there of this is depression, anxiety, stress score, DAS. It's a standardised psychological scoring system which people do, and they fill out a survey, and they're giving ratings. And it's often if a psychologist is interviewing people, they will actually administer a DAS, and there are standardised scores that they use, and it's a system on its own. And a psychologist will say, well, this person has a DAS score of so-and-so, and they'll treat them for 6 weeks, and they say, we've been able to bring their DAS score from 20 back to 10. Well, just changing your diet halved the risk of, halved the DAS score in females. Wasn't quite as dramatic a reduction in men, but about 15 back to around about 8 or 9 in the males in that study. And it's very interesting that they're often a group that are doing the same sort of things, but they're eating a whole lot of different things. Now, if those of you who've been along to CHIP programs know that we explain to you that we think it's a good idea to eat healthy, but not everybody who's an Adventist eats healthy. But they often do lots of other things like not smoking and doing other things that are socially very similar. So it makes a very interesting group to compare, and that was one of the reasons they did this study. Just for a little bit more interest here, this is a fruit versus control for snacks, for anxiety, depression, somatic changes, cognitive changes, fatigue, emotional distress. And all of those, for anyone who's a statistician, can see that the p-value was significant in all of them. And the smaller the p-value, more likely is to be significant. So 0.05 is not as good as a 0.005, and a 0.001 is showing this is really, really dramatic. But all of them were significant. The only interesting thing with this study was that the control group, they compared eating fruit with having chocolate bars and fried potato and potato chips. So they said, was it the good stuff or was it the bad stuff? So that wasn't a very useful study, perhaps, but it looked very impressive when they presented it. So what about the role of happiness? Are happy people more healthy, or are healthier people more happy? And which came first, the chicken or the egg? And I suggest to you that the things are happening perhaps both ways, but some of the studies were being done to have a little look at that. And this study that I had a look at, the viral nasal drop challenge, you've got to pay people reasonably well to catch a cold. I think they paid them about $800 each. And they divided them up into a happy group and into a sad group, and they gave them a viral load directly into their nose. So they just lay down and put the drops in their nose. 1 out of 5 people in the happy group developed symptoms, and 1 out of 3 in the sad group developed symptoms. Quite a dramatic difference there. But the question was, is there only indirectly or directly that the association between healthy behaviour? So do happy people just do things better because sad people, well, the devil may care, I might as well eat, drink, and tomorrow I'll be dead, so it doesn't matter if I don't eat properly. So they tried to do then prospective studies, having a look to see if there was going to be much difference. So they're proposing, what's the possible mechanisms of diet? So they looked at phytochemical-rich foods and gave foods of a high nutrient value, such as flavonoids, and found in the group, in one study, and this is one study, I'm going to look at another one in a moment, in the study that was having the highest quintile, so they divided them up into groups, and the highest group had 80% less depression, 67% less anxiety, and 70% less psychological distress than the group that had the lowest levels. And there was intermediate levels in between those groups. I thought, is it possible that scientists always want to know why? What is it in the food that we're eating that causes issues? Anyway, they divided things up, and this is a complicated looking slide, but it's not there for anything other than to show you that they looked at high flavonoid fruits and vegetables. And this group here is the high flavonoid group in vegetables. There's fruit and vegetables are listed there. And we can come back and have a look later if you want to, but this is the low flavonoid fruit and vegetable group. All they did was they say, well, we're going to give half of the group this and the other half that group, and we're going to follow them and see what happens. Well, this is what happened. You have 3 quintiles here. You've got the group having the lowest level of flavonoids, the group having the medium level of flavonoids, and the group having the most. Now, the group having the most were T1, the blue ones. Or is it the other way around? This is a vertical axis of prevalence of depressive symptoms, anxiety, and psychological distress. Depression, anxiety, psychological distress across those 3 groups. And you can see that there's a dramatic difference between those who are consuming the most to those who are consuming, these are consuming the most, and these are consuming the least in each of those things across the board. And that was a prospective study. We actually looked and see what was happening if you divide people up and you follow them up to see what's going on.
Go back to that list, a lot of the foods are
still good foods.
Necessary food.
There's still good foods up there.
So what's the balance? Yeah.
I don't know, but flavonoids is just a thing that's present in some foods and not in other foods. I assume I might want to comment about this in due course, but you've got things up there like my favourite mangoes and things are up there, grapes over here. But we've got strawberries and raspberries and blueberries and blackberries over here.
Beans and broccoli. I mean, they're all good for other reasons.
Yes,
It's saying that the more you have of flavonoids, the better you are on that. But there's got to be you've got to have some of the others too.
Oh, absolutely. I agree entirely with you in that regard. So this was just someone saying, well, can we start and sort of say what is it all about? But just looking at the groups, I just said, well, this seems to work, and for reasons we don't entirely understand, there may be lots of other factors, and eating a whole food plant-based diet is terribly critical and important. This is looking at a 22-week study now that looked between a vegan group and a control group. So this just looked at taking a group and half of them on a vegan diet and the other half having an omnivorous diet. And you can see that the black lines, press the right button, the black lines here are the vegan group, and so much statistically difference. This has changed from baseline. So they started them all off, and the groups that are on the vegan diet, apart from this emotional role limitations score, every other group was dramatically improved by being in the vegan group.
Physical role limitations
Psychologists need to find all sorts of measures, don't they, to say, how do you feel? Physical functioning, general health, physical role limitations. We talked about emotional role limitations, bodily pain, vitality, social functioning, and mental health. But they're the things they measured in that group, and it was interesting that they had a study that went long enough to be able to look at that. Now, they've done some other studies as well, and weight loss study over 12 months. There's two groups they tried. Both diets work. Low-fat, high-carbohydrate diet versus a high-fat, low-carbohydrate diet. And we're not having a no-fat in either group. The low-fat is not a no-fat group. But there was greater well-being was reported from the people in the low-fat group than those who are in the high-fat group. And there was a cholesterol study I looked at which said very much the same. People felt better when they were eating better. And the cholesterol study showed those who lost cholesterol came down actually felt better than those whose cholesterol didn't come down.
But to actually lose weight, don't the test for losing weight,
Yep.
You're better off with a higher fat and lower carbohydrate, because when you have some fat, it satisfies the hunger and you don't eat as much.
And the type of fat's really important as well. And I don't believe people should have a no-fat diet, but I think we do find that a number of people do seem to respond. Those who are pre-diabetic often respond to the high-fat, low-carbohydrate group. But these were just a balancing of the effect of one was, these weren't taken to their extremes. These were groups that had some fat, but mainly carbohydrates, and the others that had the high-fat diet to try and get what we call the ketogenic diet, where they were having high fat levels. The ketogenic diet with almost no carbohydrates entirely tended to make people feel a whole lot worse.
There's some studies that I've been reading about that if you have a high carbohydrate diet, that it can make you more susceptible to sugar diabetes, because it gives you a sugar craving because you release more to eat up the sugar.
Insulin.
Yes. You release more when you have a high carbohydrate. So there's a lot of contradictory sort of.
Yes, maybe contradictory in some senses. The evidence seems to point that if we're having, people often eat far too much.
Yes.
And they eat far too much carbohydrate, but it's mainly the refined carbohydrates that are particularly the worst. So if we eat the carbohydrates in their natural state as much as possible, so they're unrefined, then we find that they digest much more slowly and have a greater GI. So glucose levels come up and down much more slowly, but they spread out as they digest over a long period of time. Whereas eating high carbohydrate and the sorts of foods we eat in the West, like white bread and white rice and those things, the sugar levels go up and down very, very quickly and cause exactly the thing you're talking about, with increasing the risk of diabetes by just the overstimulation of insulin and the overstate. That's a talk perhaps for another time, but it is an important point that you're bringing out.
So one of the things that this thing I just read just recently was that why you should eat a lot of fruit, which borne out by that, it was saying that you shouldn't eat fruit after about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They've done some studies, according to this study, that has said that it makes you more, that you get sugar cravings, and that you'll go into the evening with sugar cravings and start wanting to eat sweet foods, and that if you have too much fruit, if you have fruit after about 4 o'clock, said you should have your fruit early in the day where you're burning off the sugar, and as you start to relax, you don't have as much sugar in your diet. This is about getting sugar diabetes and stuff like this, you know.
Can I just say something?
Yeah.
Especially about the sugar diabetes.
Yes.
We have some really good observational data. It's not clinical, on massive numbers, like we're talking 500,000 people in China, and it shows very consistently with a dose-response relationship that the more fruit you eat, the lower your risk of type 2 diabetes, but whole fruit, not
Yes,
juice.
yes.
And even if you have diabetes, the more fruit you eat, the lower the risk of diabetes complications. This is quite
Because of the
contrary.
fibre, yes.
Fibre and flavonoids and all the other polyphenols, because it's a very complex matrix. The whole fruit is very different to how we used to think. We just used to assume things because it's got this much sugar in it or whatever, it's going to behave like that, but it doesn't. So you have to test the food to look at the whole thing. The other thing, what was the other thing you were saying? I just wanted to, sorry Peter.
No, please, I appreciate some information.
The low, the high carb, the devil's in the detail. Which carb? Peter was absolutely right. The quality of the carb makes all the difference. You can design a study to show that low carb's better, but longer term, at 12 months, we have good data in our clinical trials that the low carb, high fat diets, people on those diets don't do any better with their weight control than any other diet in the world. So it doesn't work in the short term, especially at 6 months, you lose more weight more rapidly. But longer term, it doesn't seem to be helpful. And also, that kind of makes sense when you also look at other outcomes for health, because the people that live the longest, that have the lowest rates of most chronic disease, are all on high carb diets. Some even on high fat, like the Mediterranean, but the quality of carbs. So going back to your point, you know, these whole foods, these healthy, you know, the kind of stuff you've been learning here, I guess, with the CHIP program, not the carbs that people you know tend to eat in Western countries. So when researchers just describe it as high and low, like you've really got to know, well, what did they actually feed them, or what didn't they feed them? Because that can completely change the results and kind of skew things, and people think, oh, this is better, or you know, or the other's better. So there's no problem high carb if it's the right carb, because actually if it's low carb, how are you going to feed your microbiome? You don't get enough fibre. This is a big problem.
See, why I've been studying this bit is because for years and years and years, I've always, when I finish my main meal of the night, we usually finish with fruit.
It's a fruit.
We have blueberries, blackberries, mangoes, apples, pears, stone fruit in season, and I haven't got a sugar craving until I eat fruit, and then I eat fruit, and I feel I want more sweet food, and I keep on eating fruit and stuff like that to excess, and that puts weight on, just eating fruit to excess, especially I think eating it in the evening.
Well, it depends obviously how many pieces and what the rest of your meal, the context is as well.
Well, I have a vegetable-based meal,
Okay.
but then I finish off with fruit, fresh food,
Yeah.
not tinder or anything.
Yeah. Any carbohydrate, the 4 p.m. thing is just someone's personal opinion.
Yeah.
It's not evidence-based. There's no agreement on that. But we know as soon as the sun starts coming down, you start making melatonin, and guess what happens to insulin? As melatonin levels go up, insulin levels go down, which means it's not just fruit. We shouldn't be eating late and having a lot of carbohydrate of any type. It'd be better to be, as you said,
Well, we usually have our
eating
meal about 6 o'clock.
Yes. But it's not just fruit alone, is I guess the point I'm trying to make. Especially rice. A lot of people eat rice. Rice
we
is
have a fair
very
bit of
high
rice.
glycemic, and
But
that's
I
the
use
thing.
brown rice.
It's still fairly high GI.
Yes.
But if you try barley, I'm sure you've done recipes with barley, it's much lower. It might actually give you that longer lasting
I have
energy.
barley usually lunch time.
Okay, but I would swap the rice.
Swap it.
Even the brown, it's not low GI. It's healthier, and there's data showing that whole grains, including brown rice, are protective, but it's still fairly high GI. And if you have a large load, so you have a high GI food with a high glycemic load because you've got a lot of grams of carb, that will spike and then drop, as Peter was saying, and then when it's those high, you know, the sort of the roller coaster things that kind of really affect us. So try the barley. It's really low GI. It's
So replace rice with barley.
Yeah, I would at night, and you will find it's a lot more filling too. I mean, you got to chew it. It's chewy. You got to eat slower. So there's all of that. So you're getting a slower release, and keep the higher GI rice earlier in the day. So
Is that pearl barley?
Yeah, I guess what I was going to ask is, because what we buy in the shops these days is pearl barley, which is polished barley. Is that all right? Or?
It's still low GI because barley's an interesting grain. A lot of grains have their fibre on the outside.
Yes.
Barley has it across the grain.
Right.
And it's GI, however
So
you
even though
low
polished,
GI,
it hasn't
however you
taken
torch.
much.
Yeah, and there's also this beautiful, my favourite barley is black barley, which is now available in Australia to buy. It's an heirloom grain. But I'd go for something like that, or if you still want to go lower, there's other things. But sorry, I just had to respond to a few things.
Well, no, I think it's good. I was just going to move on and keep our questions coming, but that's good. I'm going to just move on at this stage to think about a couple of other factors that we may be aware of, and some things you may or may not have heard of. Arachidonic acid. I've talked to you in the past about arachidonic acid when it comes to inflammation, but arachidonic acid is a component of all animal cells. So if we eat animal foods, then we're going to get arachidonic acid. So someone will have a look and sort of say, is it arachidonic acid that's causing issues? It's very high levels in chickens and eggs. Now, arachidonic acid is also associated with omega-6 oils, which are many of your seed oils if you use seed oils.
So it's in omega-6 oils as well, is it?
It is. Omega-6 oils are tended to be metabolized to arachidonic acid as well in the pathways that they do in terms of metabolism. Now, arachidonic acid is inflammatory, and I've talked to you about inflammation before. And it's been demonstrated that arachidonic acid is increased, it's been increased levels in people with dementia. So people with neuroinflammation have higher levels of arachidonic acid, and it's been associated with the studies of dementia. And there's also high levels of statistically higher levels of arachidonic acid in those who have committed suicide. So it does things to us. So this was the background for looking and sort of saying, okay, we're going to do a study. And this is a study. They compared vegans with those who ate vegetables and fish, and those who were in controls who had an omnivorous diet. And you can see there that the vegan diet, this vegan diet that they fed people, had almost no omega-3s. EPA and DHA are the two primary omega-3 fatty acids. And this is why there's been a big push to eat more fish. Because we say if we eat more fish, we increase our levels of omega-3s, and that's got very beneficial things. Because higher levels of omega-3 to omega-6 ratio tends to improve our risk of inflation, of inflammation in the body. The control groups were getting small amounts of EPA and DHA, and the levels of AHA of arachidonic acid were slightly higher than the fish group. The vegans, because they're not eating any animal products, didn't get any arachidonic acid directly in their diet.
But vegans can actually turn omega-6 into omega-3s, can't they?
No, they convert omega-3s from ALA, which we need to start eating. And ALA is things like fish, like flaxseed and things like that. Yeah. And once we have a lot of omega-6s, omega-6 blocks the transmission and the conversion of ALA into EPA and DHA. I'll go back and have a look at the slide because I've got those from when we did our inflammation talk, but that's the sum of that. So they look to sort of say, well, what's going to be the outcome if we look at this separately? And does anyone want to try and predict which one was what's going to happen? Now this is talking about mood now. I'm just going to show you the graph of what happened. So you've got this in your mind that the vegans are having almost no EPA and DHA, but they're having almost as much arachidonic acid as those in the control groups. And this is the results. And it's very, very interesting. So we've got the vegan group on the left, and we're looking at their scores that they achieved in the groups. And the two blocks, the blocks at the front, is the DAS score that I talked to you about before. DAS, DAS, DAS. So this was the improvement in mood over in this group compared with this group. So this is inverted in the sense that the higher the score here, the better it was. The POMS stands for Profile of Mood States, and that's another technique they use to measure what happened in various individuals. So this is a profile of mood states. There was a somewhat of a difference between the control and the fish group, which was statistically not significant. But it appears to be some improvement there. The most improvement was definitely in the group that were having the vegan diet.
That mood bit,
yes,
fit in with what they used to think in the old days, that to their warriors they fed them meat because it made them more aggressive. So it'd probably give them a bad mood.
Sounds like a good theory to me. There's all sorts of theories, and when you go online to read stuff, there are every guru in the world who wants to produce their information. And sometimes trying to weed the sheep from the goats is really very, very difficult. Now, the last thing I want to talk to you about is BDNF. Has you all heard of brain-derived neuropathic factor? New one? No? You've never heard of brain-derived neuropathic factor? I hadn't heard of brain-derived neuropathic factor either when I went looking. So that was a new one on me. Now, brain-derived neuropathic factor modulates neurotransmitter disease, and it causes the growth and differentiation and survival of presynaptic structure. So nerves need to grow out and they need to connect to another spot in our brain to be able to communicate, and promotes axonal elongation. Now, depressed people have neuronal dieback, quite dramatically so. So BDNF seems to be something that would be very desirable to have more of it. So how do we regulate BDNF, brain-derived neuropathic factor? 1 teaspoon of turmeric a day in one study increased BDNF by 50%. So tick for turmeric. It was increased by the flavonoids, and we've talked about flavonoids before in fruit and vegetables. It's improved in grains and herbs, and improved in nuts. Now, if you fast for 72 hours, you actually get your BDNF going up. That seems to be a very, very... and we wonder if that's a stress effect. If you fast for long enough, you start feeling better after around about 72 days. Most people feel really terrible. I've never managed to fast for 72 hours, so don't quote me. But people who do fast for 72 hours end up with a feeling of elation, and everything sort of starts to regulate out again. I think there's much better ways of doing it than that, but it's just worth noting. A high-fat meal reduced BDNF in the blood after 2 hours. So I gave people a high-fat meal, measured their blood, their BDNF factors had fallen significantly even after 2 hours. But I think the most important and interesting here is that this is a 3-month study where they got people to do 1 hour of moderate exercise. Now, remember, moderate exercise is the level at which you can talk but not sing. So you need to take a few extra breaths as you were doing things, because you were exerting yourself to that level, but you weren't exerting yourself to the point of exhaustion. And by doing 1 hour of exercise a day, increased BDNF 4-fold in 3 months. It's a pretty dramatic thing. So we've thought for a long time that exercise was just helping us to feel better by increasing the flow of blood and oxygen to our brains. But now we have another reason perhaps to be looking at this, that they've found this thing that occurs in our nervous system that gets into our bloodstream and can be measured. So, just to summarise things about diet, fruit and vegetables are antioxidant and anti-inflammatory and low fat. And both the antioxidant effect, the anti-inflammatory effect, and the fact that you're eating them rather than eating other things seems to have a positive effect on our mood. Fat can reduce cerebral blood flow within 2 hours, but we also observe long-term effects, and we've mentioned some of those with BDNF. Arachidonic acid, which is derived from animal products, is pro-inflammatory. I've got to think our bodies have an immune system, and they have a firefighting system. Inflammation is like having a firefighting system. We need to put inflammation out. So our immune system will deal with invaders, but inflammation is something that invaders can cause, but other things can cause inflammation as well. Mood disturbance, depression, anxiety, and stress symptoms are relieved just after 2 weeks of a high nutrient vegan diet. And positive psychological well-being, happiness, life satisfaction, feeling of flourishing is associated with a whole food plant-based diet. And in case I think I've missed anything else out, there's lots of other things perhaps that I could have included. Lavender oil has been suggested as a very effective thing for reducing anxiety levels. Some people wonder if it's the effect in the study that they did with people just being massaged, so maybe massage has an effect. Aromatherapy changes brainwaves, and perhaps another thing to consider. There's a study where lavender oil and lorazepam was shown to have a similar effect. Orange oil may be something that has some benefits as well. And relaxation music, so you can hear the music, but they played Mozart in headphones to people in intensive care who are unconscious. And because they're doing blood, I mean, some patients in intensive care, we measured their blood twice a day, sometimes more often, but everybody has blood taken every day in intensive care. I don't know how anyone survives intensive care with the amount of blood that we used to drain out of them, but we were draining blood. It used to be my job of going around taking blood out of patients. Some of them was easy as anything, and some of them not. But Mozart played in their headphones reduced the adrenaline level in this study to a half of what it was, and it reduces cortisol levels as well. The sorts of music you listen to, it's not just music generally, because they found that head-banging music didn't seem to have quite the same effect as relaxing music did. Pardon?
Hard rock didn't take it.
Hard rock didn't seem to do things nearly as well. So in summary, I would suggest to you that a multifactorial approach often works best. So we need to think about all the factors that are contributing to feeling anxiety, but I think dietary factors have been largely overlooked. Medications work, but they come with side effects. And some people think about they may need to use them short term, and don't be afraid to use anything short term. But everything that's used long term tends to be considered to be addictive, even if it's not physically addictive, it's psychologically addictive. So we have to consider the physical, the mental, the social, and the spiritual factors. And we've talked about Chip of being all parts being related, and all of those things can contribute to our feelings of well-being. That's where I'm going to stop. I've been talking long enough. And we can have some questions perhaps about some of the things to do with this. And I'll welcome any of that now if you haven't